Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. Thank you for joining us. We're keeping it real. I'm Robert Nasir. I'm joined, as always, by James Valliant, and we are discussing Leonard Peikoff's answers to the questions of the day, difficult questions. We have been using the book, Keeping It Real, and the many, many answers to podcast questions that Leonard Peikoff answered. Well, given the news of the day, we're going to do that, but we're going to start off with a couple other answers from Leonard Peikoff. Leonard Peikoff published an essay entitled "End States Who Sponsor Terrorism" in response to 9/11, and we've got to talk about that today in response to today's news. James Valliant, thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to the conversation because it needs to happen, even though these are trying times. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing okay. I'm still a bit of post-traumatic stress disorder going on in me. I have to say, because of the events, but they do need to be addressed. We do need to cope with evil, and this is one of those times where it is unavoidable. We're living in, objectivists have pointed out over and over, you feel like Cassandra. She was the princess of Troy, who was loved by the god Apollo, who could predict the future. And when she rejected Apollo, Apollo couldn't take away the gift of prophecy, but he then cursed her so that she would never be believed. And so poor Cassandra, was the Trojan horse, wheels up to the gates of Troy, says, no, don't let it in, don't let it in. But she has to live through the next 2 days where she sees the horrible atrocities of war, and she saw it all coming. And sometimes as objectivists, I think we get the feeling that we're Cassandra. And this is definitely an example of that. We have been warning for decades about the appeasement of the nation of Iran. And right now, we are living in the results. The violence, the murder, the horrors that we're watching are the direct result of Iran. The left is saying, well, we need proof that they planned and executed this particular. No, we do not. They have been funding, supporting, training Hamas militants, Hezbollah militants for some time now, and for decades, since 1979, when the Islamic Republic of Iran seized American diplomats, mind you, in an open act of war, and America did nothing about it. Objectivists have been saying that we have been, in effect, sanctioning whatever violence and evil is to come, and we have done just that by not focusing on the right enemy at 9/11, because we were all concerned about a war with the Islamic world as such, and we were making distinctions between Shia, Sunni, and so forth. We can see now Iran is supplying both Hezbollah and Hamas, Shia and Sunni, in their assault on Israel. And the Americans who died a few days ago, were murdered by Tehran, by the monsters in Iran. This is the fruit of our appeasement of Iran, not just Hamas, but of Iran. Iran is the source of this. And until Iran is taken out, this kind of stuff will continue to happen. And when 9/11 happened, Dr. Leonard Peikoff, my teacher, my mentor, said it so well. I hate to take us away from the book a little bit, but I really wanted us to go back to Dr. Peikoff's point, which is now more than 20 years old. But the death of innocent civilians the slaughter of innocent civilians, including Americans, that we have just witnessed over the weekend, is the direct result of ignoring the Cassandra-like prophecies of Dr. Peikoff more than 20 years ago. I am going to again try and contain my emotions once more on one of these podcasts, but I'm finding it, I hope viewers will understand, I'm finding it a little difficult these days to remain calm and my happy-go-lucky normal self. This is serious business, ladies and gentlemen, and we have to think in the long term, think in principle, or this stuff will continue to happen.
Yeah, James, I would not want you to hold back on your passion this week for several reasons, both because we need the reminder of the moral clarity that is required to address these issues. But also later on the reality show today, we're going to talk about the BBC. We're going to talk about the press and how they, in the UK, are refraining from using the word terrorism in order to be objective in their news reporting. As if values aren't objective, as if
Right.
labeling these people what they are is non-objective. So no, don't hold back your passion at all. Folks in the chat are saying they completely understand, and I agree 100%. Bonnie in the chat is reminding us Leonard Peikoff's essay. I shouldn't even call it an essay. It's too important for that. But end states who sponsor terrorism is not just an essay that Leonard Peikoff wrote. He actually paid to have this published as a full page ad in the New York Times after 9/11. I sense that maybe somebody who's got the money needs to make that happen again today. Fortunately, it's out there. It's on the internet. It's well known in the news community at the time when Leonard Peikoff and Yar and Brooke were able to get appearances on television when they weren't ignored as the Cassandras that you talk about. So
Yes.
you're exactly right. We're going to take a couple of points from that essay before we go back to the book, which will also address some similar issue or related issues.
And even if it takes us 2 weeks to go through that material, I'm happy to do that, because I think these are very important issues, both in dealing with the issue, existential issue of Iran and Hamas, but also for ourselves.
You know, we're usually good at judging what we can fit in an hour.
Yeah, you can
But
see
this
I
time-
kind of help to cope with it. And I think all of us probably need, when you hear the stories, and I know not all of them are confirmed yet, but when you see the images and you hear the stories of horror, of innocent civilians being taken and killed, and in an unprovoked surprise attack that went specifically for civilians, old people and children, young people at a concert, mowing them down indiscriminately, burning houses indiscriminately. It's important for us to be able to cope with it on an individual level as well as on an international level. And those are the kind of issues I think that Dr. Peikoff is very good in both of those respects in helping us. So I ask my old mentor, at least spiritually right now, help us, Dr. Peikoff. You're our only hope. If I can quote Princess Leia.
And that's what he's going to do this morning. And since you mentioned the atrocities that we're talking about, just evil. Evil doesn't seem like an adequate word at this point, but the way in which people have been butchered, slaughtered, as you say, not just civilians, but women, children, just, if there's one thing that could possibly be worse than that, you haven't mentioned yet, but I know you will, the hostage taking, which makes this an almost impossible situation to address. But let's get into it. Let me give the first quote from that essay by Leonard Peikoff, because I want to discuss this. Leonard Peikoff wrote, "The behavior of such militants." Now he's talking about the 9/11 terrorists, but see how this applies, because he wasn't talking about a specific concrete. He's dealing with the abstractions. "The behavior of such militants is that of the regimes which make them possible." Again, the behavior of the militants is that of the regimes that make them possible. These aren't random people that Hamas sent out. And Hamas is not a random organization. This is an organization that Iran has sent out or sponsored in a way in which Iran is now the enemy. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't go off script. Let me finish reading Leonard Peikoff. "The behavior of such militants is that of the regimes which make them possible. And their atrocities are not crimes, but acts of war. The proper response, as the public now understands, is a war in self-defense. In the excellent words of Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, we must, quote, end states that sponsor terrorism," unquote. A proper war in self-defense, Leonard Peikoff goes on, a proper war in self-defense is one fought without self-crippling restrictions placed on the commanders in the field. It must be fought with the most effective weapons we possess. A few weeks ago, Rumsfeld refused correctly to rule out nuclear weapons. And it must be fought in a manner that secures victory as quickly as possible and with the fewest U.S. casualties, regardless of the countless innocents caught in the line of fire. These innocents suffer and die because of the action of their own government in sponsoring the initiation of force against America. Their fate, therefore, is their government's moral responsibility. There is no way for our bullets to be aimed only at evil men. Unquote, Leonard Peikoff. Everything about that we need to talk about. Of course, that last bit there is what we're seeing in the news. Well, Israel's now retaliating against innocent men, women, and children, as if there's some equivalency to what Hamas did, as if somehow we should have bullets that can be aimed only at evil men.
No, this was an unprovoked act of aggression. This was an unprovoked act of aggression. Any comparison of what Israel is doing in self-defense to what Hamas did is the sanctioning of that evil. Israel has a right to protect its own soldiers. If that means flattening Gaza before going in for a ground occupation, and I think that Gaza should be completely occupied in order for them to eliminate, annihilate, take off the face of the earth everyone associated with Hamas. And this does not mean we're comparing numbers. That would not be just. It would not be just. If you compare Palestinian civilian casualties to Israeli civilian casualties, you are supporting the murder that just took place by Hamas. Don't delude yourself. Don't delude yourself. All of these protesters in New York City, all of these protesters in London, all of these protesters around the world who are out there celebrating, out there defending what Hamas has done, all of these people who are giving a moral equivalency to Hamas and Israel are on the side of evil. You cannot sit on the fence here. Any silence, any sanctioning, any moral equivalence of this evil, you are on the side of evil. You are sanctioning it, you are promoting it, and consider the new dimension that Peikoff adds. The states which sponsor it, the world's leading sponsor of terrorism for most of my life has been the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are the ones behind this. They have engaged in an act of war against both Israel and the United States. This stuff will continue to happen until we deal with that evil. Putting up with Hamas over here, the equivalent over here is putting up with Iran. The two are the same. Everything that Hamas has done in Israel was done at the sanction, encouraging of Iran. When it happened, the Ayatollahs declared victory. Oh, just over this weekend, they declared victory as to what happened. Any attempt to leave Iran out of the picture, any attempt to morally make some kind of moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel, you guys are the ones who need to check your premises. Your judgment is warped. You are advocating on behalf of these murderers, and there's no other way to put it.
Yes. It seems so straightforward, what Leonard Peikoff is saying, and yet in the press, in the news, certainly socially, we hear people say, well, you know, there's only so much we can do and not be what? Not be as bad as him. There is nothing as bad as Hamas. There is no way, whether it requires us, I say us, because of course I'm thinking we are Israel. We are Israel. We are all Israel now. Whether it takes us going in and killing 5 people in Gaza or 500,000 people in Gaza, the numbers are irrelevant. The only question is, what does it take to end this war and ensure that it's not going to happen again? What does it take to end Hamas and to end the states that sponsor this?
And we can.
What is
Israel can. If we can, we must under these circumstances. And we can. The only thing holding us back, are wrong-headed moral considerations about collateral damage here. And it's totally wrong-headed. It's totally wrong. Hamas is murdering their own people. They're telling them, this is the news story I heard yesterday. Israel, of course, is trying to save Palestinian civilians. So they say you have to leave certain areas in Gaza. They've told these people, leave these certain areas. What does Hamas say in return? No, stay in your homes. Don't listen to the Israeli military forces. The IDF is telling you to move for your own well-being. Stay there. They want casualties on their own side to make headlines, to play this psychology, to play this, and this Christian turn the other cheek psychology. My wife and I love historical dramas. We were watching one of them, and it was about the medieval church. And there was a cardinal who was leaving Rome, and a group of bandits with a couple of nuns as his escort. And he's on the road, and a group of bandits come up, and they're about to attack, obviously rape the nuns and kill the cardinal. And the cardinal sees them happening. He lures the guys up there and kills them. And perfectly just, because he was about to get killed himself, and these poor nuns were about to get raped and killed. And so, but his line I found very interesting to the nuns after he kills the bandits. He says, "Sisters, sometimes goodness needs a little badness to protect it." That is the wrong way of looking at it. If you look at it that way, if you see your self-defense as being evil, or on the same level even, connected in any way with the assault of the aggressors, you are all messed up. There was nothing evil in what the cardinal did. He was protecting lives. He was acting in self-defense and defense of others. He had every right to use deadly force against these attackers. There was nothing bad about it. But you see, Christians have this view that somehow any violence in return. In fact, to be moral, you have to be a complete schmoo, turn the other cheek, be deep in the throes of Stockholm syndrome, where you love your enemy and believe he has some kind of justification no matter what horrors he engages in. No, friends. There is nothing that the force being used by Israel is heroic good. And to count the number of civilians is absolute. I don't care if Hamas had the policy of putting their own civilians in front. Just being the aggressor makes them responsible for every single one of their own casualties. But in this case, it is 100 times, 10 times, 1,000 times, I don't know what the factor is, more clear. Hamas is absolutely telling their own people to commit suicide so that their casualty numbers can be inflated. Under those circumstances, we must ignore the casualty numbers in Gaza of civilians. Ignore them. Or put them on the same side as IDF casualties, Israeli defense casualties. When I see newspapers say, oh, so many Israelis died, so many Palestinians died, that in itself is evil. As if, and what they're doing is they're using the strategy of Hamas. They are using the very tactics that Hamas wants the press to use. They are useful idiots of Hamas. These people in the press who compare the civilian casualties to the military casualties in Israel, or the civilian casualties in Israel, they are Hamas propagandists as far as I'm concerned. Excuse me, I'm getting a little heated again, but
no, I think there's great clarity in reminding people that necessary evil is a contradiction. There are no necessary evils. If it's necessary, it's not evil. And if it's something necessary you've got to do, it may be harsh, it may be cruel, it may be whatever you want to call it, but it's not evil. No, we've got to do whatever we've got to do. And there are no necessary evils. If it's necessary, it is good. It is right. And if our pragmatists, if our religionists, if our press understood that, they wouldn't be writing, they wouldn't be saying half of the things that they're saying, and we would have a chance.
Right. No, for the regime change that we need to have happen in Iran, there are going to be casualties, and more casualties than occurred against Israeli civilians, or maybe even the IDF casualties that will happen in Gaza over the next few days. There will be more deaths. But ladies and gentlemen, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, we were saying, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. If we don't deal with it now, there are going to be more murders in the future. If we don't deal with this now, and to count the numbers here, say, oh, well, look at all the Iranians that we might be killing. Look at all the Palestinians we might be killing. We're not just talking about a retaliation for this specific act either. We're talking about every other potential future act. And these acts will continue to happen until the government of Iran changes. They will continue to happen until and unless we deal with it in however harshly we need to deal with it. And if we don't, we will have the blood on our hands for all the future women and children who get killed in the future. Because Hamas could go tomorrow. Hezbollah could go tomorrow. Some new offshoot branch of the Islamic Brotherhood or some new branch that Iran would invent will happen. It's not contingent upon just Hamas or just Hezbollah. It's Iran. They are the source of this, and they will find ways to do these things again and again and again until they are taken out. It is the future that we have to be thinking about, and all of the future women and children who might get slaughtered in still another attack. But this shit is going to happen until they go. Promise.
Well, you're exactly right. Bonnie in the chat is saying thousands of lives would have been saved if Israel had responded quickly and completely years ago. A partial response is inhumane.
Precisely.
And that's exactly where we're at today. A partial response today, something that brings peace for a month or a year, is going to lead to the next slaughter.
I have to quote Ayn Rand. Compassion for the torturers is a betrayal of the victims of torture. Obviously, to the extent you're saying, oh, well, don't be too hard on those killers. Don't be too hard on those aggressors. What you are doing is sanctioning and encouraging the aggression and the murder in the first place. And don't delude yourself. It is not some kind of moral equivalency here. Not all violence is the same. The violence used in self-defense is good, virtuous, the very opposite of the kind of violence that we saw over the weekend.
Yeah, and it's got to be understood that those poor Palestinian children or wives or families that are going to die if this is done properly, those people have been loaded into cannons. They're being used as ammunition by Hamas, figuratively and literally, because they're being set up to die if any righteous action is taken in response to Hamas's aggression. And it's not just rhetoric to say, well, that's the moral responsibility of he who initiated force. Yes, it is, but look at what that looks like in reality. As Leonard Peikoff says, we don't have bullets that will only shoot the bad guys. No, this is war. And there's only one way to win war, and that is to defeat the enemy. And it doesn't mean walking into the offices of Hamas Incorporated and blowing up that building. That's not how war works. People are going to die, quote unquote, innocent. I won't even say quote unquote. Innocent people are going to die at the hands of Hamas. It doesn't matter whether it's our bombs dropping or them being literally used on the front of their tanks as human shields. That blood is all on the hands of Hamas. And here's the thing. It can't be any other way. That is the reality. That is what the press, that is what our intellectuals refuse to understand. They imagine somehow we can have, hell, even on the right, they're the ones who came up with just war theory. They imagine we can have a just war in which only the bad guys are going to die. Only the evil is going to be punished.
Oh, no.
That is not what war is.
Yeah, no, I heard a former Governor Huckabee, who was a former Christian clergyman, announced that, oh, he's totally on Israel's side because Israel will be so gingerly sensitive to civilian casualties, don't you know? They'll be the good Christians here. No, that is the enemy. That thinking is the wrong-headed approach. And mind you, he's on the right. He's one of these people who say, yeah, Israel should do something. But look at how they disarm themselves. Look at how they pull from under the rug from under themselves and the morality of their position. Israel and America can't do anything because, well, unless we can prove to the whole world that we're taking extra steps to make sure civilians don't die. No, not a single Israeli soldier needs to die in order to protect a dozen, 50, 100 Palestinian civilians. No. Israel can protect their soldiers and regard their soldiers' lives as of greater value because this is war, they need soldiers, and the civilians over there are being used by Hamas and Iran, by the way. So no, the casualties on the other side are all their fault. They're the aggressors. More than that, they're using them, telling them to die for this cause. And as you know, these Islamicist fanatics are perfectly willing to commit suicide for their cause. They could have Israel gave the West or gave Gaza to the Palestinians back in 2005. They chose Hamas to rule them. Hamas has been ruling them since that time. They have been lobbing missiles at Israel over and over and over. Frankly, Israel's appeasement of Hamas for the last 15 years has set this up too. But our appeasement of Iran is what is ultimately behind it.
It's the same insanity that happened after the war in Iraq. The wrong enemy to be fighting, but definitely an enemy to be fighting. That was a just war, at least in that it was initiated against Saddam Hussein. It was an absolutely deserved war, but what did we do when it ended? We walked away and said, okay, now you guys decide what kind of government you want. Can you imagine doing that in Japan at the end of World War II and saying, okay, you can now elect, well, maybe a different emperor? No. We told them, here are the parameters. Here is the only kind of government that is going to be allowed, and we're not leaving until we see that that is in place. That is exactly what Israel should have done if they were even going to partition the country in the way that they did. Did that happen? Nothing like that happened. And as Bonnie suggests, the real question is, well, Israel will win this war. But will they really win it, or will Netanyahu once again settle for a negotiated peace?
And leave another war for the future to fight, and leave another batch of civilians on the hook to get slaughtered.
Yeah, and daily war. Israel has been at war for decades. There are bombs, missiles regularly being shot into the country, and they just accept that as a way of life. Israel has been at war for decades.
This is not resistance on the part of Palestinians. The idea that these protesters have, that these leftist kooks have, that this is somehow the noble resistance of the Palestinian people, that is total nonsense. For one thing, the reason for the timing of this and the reason why Iran pushed it right now, whatever you think of the potential peace deal between the Saudis and Israel, they were on the verge of making a peace deal. It was to scuttle a peace deal. It has nothing to do with the suffering of the Palestinian people here who are being used by the wider Islamicist cause. It had nothing to do with the resistance of Palestinian people who are being oppressed by an apartheid government in Israel. That is such a lie. If you are even tempted to go down that path, you have bought into murderous nonsense. Murderous nonsense. The reason why Iran pushed it right now is to scuttle a peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Whatever you think of Israel's peace deal there, it had nothing to do with any kind of protection of the Palestinians. No, Hamas exists to destroy Israel. They don't want to govern their people in some peaceful, prosperous way. They don't want their people to get ahead. They exist solely in order to destroy. I hope it's hard for Western minds to wrap their mind around that kind of evil. But these people would rather die themselves and take Israel down than to build a prosperous nation for Palestinians there in Gaza. They have demonstrated that now since Israel unilaterally, in effect, gave them mostly control over the Gaza Strip in 2005. No, ladies and gentlemen, this is, it's not self-evident. No, it's not obvious. No, but doesn't take that much to figure out what's going on here. It really doesn't. I'm sort of at a loss for words other than to say that Israel has every right to launch an attack right now against Iran. We should help them in doing so in every way possible. We cannot permit a nuclear-armed Iran. Israel, as I think everyone knows, has a nuclear bomb. They have not used it. They have not used it against Iran. They have not used it in any other context. If Iran had such a bomb, they would have used it over this weekend. We cannot permit Iran to get a nuclear weapon. When George Bush left Iraq, he basically gave an engraved invitation for Iran to fill the power vacuum and to come in with their influence into Iraq, which is exactly what happened. And since that happened, we have seen Iranian aggression in Yemen, in Syria, the vast sophistication of what Hezbollah is doing, and now we can see how they've been arming and training Hamas for many years. No, Iran is an aggressive dictatorship, and their aggression will continue against both other Muslims and Jews and Americans, who, by the way, are the greatest of the Satans out there, the greatest of their enemies. And I don't want any American out there to think that it's something else. I know they're primitive savages, and they are primitive savages. We wouldn't have much trouble taking them out if we really wanted to do so. They exist out of our appeasement. They exist out of our appeasement, but their aggression will continue. And if they had half a chance, they would destroy Israel and come after America.
Sorry, I've got a quick question here. I haven't been talking about Super Chat sponsoring the ARCUK, and I really should, even though it doesn't seem like the time to be doing a fundraiser, but it's doubly important that the ARCUK is receiving your support at this time. And so I want to say thank you to Dr. Ribbons, who is with a Super Chat and asked this question. And maybe it's rhetorical. She asks, well, are there counterexamples of invaders are rebuffed, not destroyed at the source, and not making another attempt at invasion? Can you think of another example of, oh, well, they were stopped, we negotiated a peace, or we just ended the violence for now. We didn't destroy them at the source, and they never came back.
I can't think of, I'm a historian, and I'm racking my brain to go back to ancient history. And if you don't take out the enemy will almost inevitably come back.
Right.
I think of every major conflict since recorded history began, whether it's the Greeks or the Persians or the Romans and the German barbarians, or more recent instances. No, you have to go for the root cause, or you're just leaving a war for a future day. I mean, right. Look at the way we appeased the Soviet Union. And look at the decade after decade of proxy war after proxy war after proxy war against communism, until the Soviet Union was taken down. Until the Soviet Union was taken down, those kind of proxy wars were inevitable and going to be continuous. And there'd be Vietnams, Koreas, Afghanistans, you name it. It was going to be inevitable and endless until you get rid of the Soviet Union.
And it might be tempting to say, well, we showed strength, but really they collapsed from within. And so, we didn't really destroy them.
Oh, we did.
There wasn't really a war. There was a Cold War.
Well, there wasn't a war, but you don't always, the way I would respond to that is you don't always need a war to take them down. Right. Again, the Russians were never 10 feet tall. All it took was a little backbone on the part of the West. And I have problems with Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher stood up for the first time, rebuilt the West's military, and showed moral clarity, calling them an evil empire. That they were always an economic basket case. They were never 10 feet tall. All it really took was that kind of an effort. Poof, they fall. But look, the same forces although the Soviet Empire fell apart, the same forces took control, in effect, of Russia. Putin, now with a religious face rather than a communist face, has again become an aggressive monster in Ukraine. And all of my Democrat friends out there who support our helping Ukraine from an invasion from Russia have to understand Russia, Iran, Hamas, they're all on the same side here. They're all working together here. Aggression is aggression, and it will continue so long as we appease it.
Dr. Ribbons has a follow-up question, but it's going to take somebody like you, who I'm sure knows 1,000 times more Athenian history than I do, to answer. She says, well, is Themistocles a supporting example? I do not know the history.
Well, Themistocles was, of course, the great Athenian naval hero of the way. I know this is taking. Just saying that makes me realize I'm going down a historical rabbit hole. But you'll understand that resisting Persia was a wonderful thing. But the conflict between the Greek world and the Persian world had just gotten started, my friend. The Alexander and Philip were yet to come about, and the Greeks understood that if they didn't deal with the Persian problem, it would keep happening. The Greeks dealt with the Persian problem with extreme prejudice, one might say, when Alexander conquered them. So really, the Persian problem for the Greek world was not subdued until Alexander conquered the Persian Empire. Now, I think was he doing it for pure self-defense motives? Was there revenge and glory, and did he want an empire of his own? Of course, of course, of course. But look at the problem. The problem was still festering between the Greek world and the Persian world until Alexander simply took out the Persians.
Good. More than I know about it. So thank you for that, James. We've also got a super chat from Apollo Zeus. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. As I say, I haven't been, and maybe I should be doing as much of the promotion and fundraising, but this is important. The work that's being done here this week. In fact, let me announce or share that there aren't going to be any other shows on the ARCUK, or at least any other topics, other than handling the current news of the day. This is the most important thing going on. Over the past week, we've gone to 7 days a week of programming because these issues need to be addressed. The word needs to go out. The moral certainty needs to be shared on YouTube, on the social networks, everywhere that you can like and share these conversations. My own show, Life on Earth, which would normally take place tomorrow, that's going to be postponed. We are, I hate the expression, but I'll use it anyway. We are laser focused on this important issue at the Ayn Rand Center UK. So thank you for your super chats. If you are interested in supporting the ARCUK, definitely do become a member. The membership link is at the top of the chat. If you're hearing this afterward or on the podcasts, just go to aynrandcenter.co.uk. Center spelled that British way, R-E at the end, aynrandcenter.co.uk. Click the membership link, become a member. During the shows, you're going to see and you're going to hear people like James and I get passionate about this. If you feel some passion and want to support the work that we're doing, those super chats all support the ARCUK. Your membership supports the ARCUK. Your liking of the shows, which costs nothing. Sharing the shows, which costs nothing, but has a big impact. If there's anything we can do to help you in this fight by sharing these ideas, please get it out there. James, let me read one more quote, the second quote from Leonard Peikoff's essay, because you mentioned the obstacles are intellectuals. He says, quote, Leonard Peikoff, "The greatest obstacle to U.S. victory is not Iran and its allies, but our own intellectuals. Even now, they are advocating the same ideas that caused our historical paralysis. They are asking a reeling nation to show neighbor love by shunning, quote unquote, vengeance. The multiculturalists, rejecting the concept of objectivity, are urging us to understand the Arabs and avoid racism, i.e., any condemnation of any group's culture. The friends of, quote unquote, peace are reminding us ever more loudly to remember Hiroshima and beware the sin of pride." I'm unquote Leonard Peikoff. I brought up Japan earlier. as an example of exactly what we should be doing, not necessarily in terms of dropping nuclear weapons, but in terms of defeating the enemy and declaring afterward that this will not be permitted, and only freedom, only liberty is allowed to be established in the places in which the evil has been put down.
Amen. Amen. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. America dropped nuclear bombs, and a great many tens of thousands of Japanese civilians were killed. There is, and a lot of objectivists are fans of the economist Henry Hazlitt, who wrote a wonderful book, Economics in One Lesson. And one of the basic lessons is the seen and the unseen. And he points out that when government spends money, for example, they can always point to the bridge government built, but you can't point to the stuff that never came into existence because government spent the money on the bridge. We can never see your project coming into reality or someone else's project coming into reality because we had to take money from you and that other person to build the bridge. Similarly with casualties, we can point to the casualties at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we don't see are the lives that saved. Had there been a conventional attack on the main island of Japan, both American and Japanese civilians and American military people, and this is the point I want to return to again, the lives of our military people have to be put on a higher priority here. But both American military casualties and Japanese civilian casualties would have been enormous. So what we don't have are the casualties, which probably would have eclipsed the casualties at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that did not occur because Hiroshima and Nagasaki occurred. There is a perfect analog here, ladies and gentlemen. If Israel should kill 10 times, 100 times as many people, 100 times as many people as died in the attack over the weekend, that would be A-okay with me. More than that. In fact, I'm not going to count it because I am aware of the future, conceptually aware of all the women and children that I mentioned earlier that will be killed and will continue to be killed until we take out the source of the problem. I want us to think about the future women and children who will be killed if the problem is not dealt with now. So it'll be real easy for y'all on the left to count up the casualties, the civilian casualties in the West Bank. But what you will not be able to count are all the lives that are going to be saved in the future because these monsters are being killed. And so it's a question of the seen and the unseen too. We have to bear in mind all of those people who we're saving and who will not be killed, the casualties that we're saving in the future. Because that is the only fair comparison here, ladies and gentlemen. No, we don't know the exact number, of course not. But the point is, these were the aggressors. And whatever the numbers are, they are the ones who took that on and, there's no other way to put it, asked for it. They begged for it. They got on their hands and asked for it with both hands. And until you give it to them with precisely the same proportionality that they mean to give it to Israel, there's not going to be a solution here. They would wipe Israel off the map if given a chance. They have had decades and decades of opportunities for peace and have rejected it, and have explicitly rejected it just simply for the name of destroying Israel. They do not want to live a prosperous, happy life in the Gaza Strip. No, they exist to destroy Israel, and they would rather die in going down with that cause. And we have to give them the chance to do so.
You mentioned a couple of things. First of all, the numbers game. You're right in that we will save more lives than will be lost. But at the same time, you're also right to point out, if you make it purely a numbers game, then you are succumbing to a vicious moral equivalence. There is no way to equate lives lost due to the actions of the aggressor with the number of lives lost in defending oneself and ensuring that that will not happen again. It's the mistake that people make in Ukraine.
Yes.
Ukraine, Russia, they both got one side attacked. One side started this war and one side is trying to defend itself. And you can argue the relative merits of the governments. I think Ukraine comes out as mixed as they are. They come out squeaky clean compared to Russia right now. But the bottom line is they were not the aggressors in
Yes, sir.
this.
And they tell me that half of Russia's military has died in the war with Ukraine. Guess who doesn't care? Me. Well, I guess I care in one sense. Russia was hell-bent on killing its own people in this way.
Yeah.
And Putin killed his own people in that way. But that is the extent to which I, quote, care. They are the aggressors. Is these same forces, this army that invaded Ukraine. Similarly, here, to go down that numbers game is already to buy into the premise that somehow the cardinal premise, to sometimes good needs a little bad. No, there's nothing bad about the use of force in self-defense when it is in self-defense. And as I say, they've had chances for peace again and again and again. They exist solely, in effect, to, if it takes their own lives down with them, to destroy Israel. They are agents, they are proxies for the wider evil Islamic forces in that region, and are being used by them, In my view, they have already been told that they're fodder by their government. For us to give them special protection is actually to fall prey to the very strategy that Hamas and Iran is using when they use the lives of innocent Palestinians. There's no other way to see it, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes. Again, we'll be talking about this on the reality show, but that's the question that comes up the most from people I know who are not evil and vicious monsters, but who have no idea what's going on there. And they will ask, well, the Gazans, set Hamas aside for a moment, they ended up being the leaders at the moment, but the Gazans, they're taking desperate measures following decades of occupation imposed on them by Great Britain and the 1948 Palestinian expulsion. What that, for our intellectuals, what that evades, for our ignorant, what that completely ignores and has no idea of is, as you say, look at the history, look at the opportunities for peace, look at the partitions that have been offered, look at what has been offered to the quote unquote Palestinian people over the years. Once you understand that, this argument that, well, Gazans are just taking desperate measures in a difficult situation they're in, all falls apart. It's a great question if you have no idea what you're talking about. Again,
Right.
If you're an intellectual, you have no excuse not to know what you're talking about.
Not to know.
As you say, the opportunities for peace, not Israel who's said, oh, no, UN, we don't want that. There have been a few deals that they have turned down too. But the UN and the League of Nations and all of these governing bodies had made these deals, have offered these, and it has been consistently the anti-Israeli side that says, not good enough, we want them wiped off the map. They have had the opportunities for peace, as you say, again and again and again, and peace is not what they want.
In fact, every single time the West has attempted peace with the Islamic fanatics, that appeasement has only encouraged more violence, has only encouraged more fanaticism. Obviously, what we've been doing for the last 50 years has been the wrong approach, because this stuff continues to happen over and over. Missiles keep getting lobbed into Israel. Terrorist acts keep happening from Islamicists. And it will go on, and it will go on, and it will go on. And innocent people will die until this problem is wiped out, and wiped out at the source. Anything else is to invite that future murder, is to give the green light of encouraging such future murder. There is only one correct response. There is only one correct response: the annihilation of these people. Yes, I hear the stories about the Palestinians who are not supporting Hamas as their government in Gaza. Well, it is your government in Gaza. You get the hell out. Get the hell out if you're being ruled by such hate-filled, murderous monsters who don't value their own lives so much as destroying Israel for some mystical, fanatical reason. You get the hell out. Otherwise, you yourself are subjecting yourself to the rational response of Israel and the West when you do something like this. It's just that simple. In fact, it's hard for me at this point. It's even hard for me to conceptualize this thing that they're calling innocent Palestinians. I'm having a hard time conceptualizing that at this point after the decades of experience that we've had there. It's impossible to truly conceptualize for me.
Well, I think of it more in terms of some are less innocent or more guilty than others. But you're right. It's hard to imagine somebody who is militantly anti-Hamas, pro-rights, pro-individualism, wants to see it and sticks around.
These are the people who were cheering in the streets at 9/11. These are the people who were cheering in the streets at 9/11 and every other terrorist atrocity that's occurred in the last 50 years. That's what we're talking about here. And they know what side they're on. Is it that individuals now? I'm not making I want to make a distinction here. I guess there is a distinction I would draw between individuals who are raised by religious fanatics, don't know any better. It could be that they are so psychologically and psychoepistemologically warped by their religion and culture that they honestly don't have any kind of moral judgment about this. But if they're that far gone. If they're that far gone psychologically and epistemologically, I'm sorry, they have been warped and destroyed and turned into hate-filled murder machines themselves by this ideology. There's only one way to deal with them. I don't care whether it's a psychological result of their upbringing or adults who should know better and are making a clear decision. In effect, they're acting the same. And once you've been sucked in as one of the sheep for these monstrous shepherds, I'm afraid you're part of the flock that has to go.
Yeah, maybe I'm too charitable, but I think they're in the same position as another group that is surrounded by the same stories, the same beliefs about what has happened, what the history looks like, and that's American college students. All they have is that one narrative with very little counterexample.
That is the most important point Leonard Peikoff made in the last quote there. The real enemies here are the intellectuals. They definitely should know better. They absolutely know better. The Harvard University, thank goodness Harvard University is pushing back a little bit. Summers, the president over at Harvard, is pushing back against all these student groups that blamed Israel for this. Student groups at Harvard, mind you. But it tells you something that's going on here. Ladies and gentlemen, your tax dollars are going to support these universities. Your tax dollars are going to support the propaganda that's causing college students, Ivy League, college educated and getting educated students to really defend this kind of atrocity, to be that psychologically twisted and blinded. Okay, that's what your tax dollars are going to. If you really want to help the people who have been slaughtered and will continue to be slaughtered until we take out the root cause of this problem, then one of the main things we need to do is stop subsidizing the teaching of this kind of vile hatred at American universities with American taxpayer money. It is inexcusable.
Right. I've got to give a shout out to Wes. Wes Stewart is in with a generous super chat. Thank you very much for that. No question, just supporting the ARCUK, and that is very good of you at any time, but especially now. Same with Gail. Gail Parker is in with a generous super chat. Thank you for that. Very much appreciated. I don't want to go past the top of the hour, James, because I know that you're going to be back on with an important episode with Rosie Ginsburg at 5:30 or 12:30 Eastern time.
I'm on a certain theme here today.
Yeah.
I think as people can detect.
And the whole conversation has been based again on Leonard Peikoff's outstanding essay, published as a full page in the New York Times at the time of 9/11, and states that sponsor terrorism. But I do want to return to the book and read what was going to be the first of three questions. I think we'll just do the one because this is going to address something that I'm feeling, that I'm seeing in the chat. Equal to reality in the chat, for example, says Israel should invoke the Bible. Ezekiel, why am I losing that? Ezekiel 25:17, quote, "And I will execute great vengeance upon them with furious rebukes, and they shall know that I am the Lord when I shall lay my vengeance upon them." Well, vengeance is not the word we want. Justice is the word we want.
Justice.
But we're all feeling it. We're all feeling that anger.
And I have to say, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is a much better approach than turn the other cheek and love your enemy. But in this case, justice would amount to 100 eyes and 100 teeth for every eye and tooth taken, because that's the only way you're going to stop these murderous fanatics.
Yes, certainly. If we were going to take anything from the Bible, maybe it's a good thing that Israel's a Jewish state and they will take the Old Testament over the New Testament. But this question from Keeping It Real, from the book, again, folks will see why I really want to try to get this in. Leonard Peikoff was asked, can't anger be a good response if it is a self-assertive, emotional reaction to an injustice? That's kind of a strange question. Did Dr. Peikoff say something different than that?
Yeah, exactly. When did Ayn Rand or Leonard Peikoff ever say? In fact, that's pretty much their position being recapitulated there.
So Leonard Peikoff answers this way. Well, I didn't intend to say that anger is always wrong. I don't know what I could have said that would have led to that. Anger is a response not only to an injustice, but to an evil of some kind. Assuming you have rationally defined evil, anger can be absolutely a reaction to an evil, and a perfectly legitimate and a perfectly valid reaction. For instance, just take the scene in The Fountainhead in which Rourke goes to Mallory's room for the first time, and he sees all the kitsch sculptures that Mallory has been forced to do. He picks one up and smashes it against the wall, murderously angry. Well, you couldn't live if you couldn't feel anger, especially in today's world. Now, there's another kind of anger, and that would be, for instance, Jim Taggart's anger at Cheryl or at Dagny, where he resents their virtue and is angry in a negative, hostile, destructive, nihilist way. So you can't say anger per se, but certainly if the values involved are rational, there are many cases where you can get angry. The commonest cases, and maybe where you would have expected X from a dear friend, when they delivered non-X, and you're just enraged that that could happen. Sometimes there's a good explanation, and sometimes there isn't. But the anger is entirely natural, unquote Leonard Peikoff. Anger is a rational, I shouldn't say rational because it's an emotion. It's a valid and appropriate response.
It is the healthy response to evil. Look, it's true. If it's there are injustices and there are injustices of different degrees. But if you don't get angry at evil, that level of injustice, then you're not having the correct emotional affect. There's something. I'm not going to say there's an emotional should here. I'm just saying there might be something psychologically you want to talk about with your therapist if you can see evil like this and not get angry.
Exactly. If you any other reaction to an evil, for example, like we're talking about today, imagine if your response instead was just sadness or helplessness, or worse, if you had flat affect, if you had no response, or worst of all, if it actually made you happy and you think, how could that happen? Well, we'll talk about that, the protests that we've seen. They're not even protests, they're celebrations. They're, I'm gonna watch my language, they're celebrations of what has happened over the last week. If that is your emotional response, you're right, you shouldn't try to put a screwdriver in your ear and fix it. You need to see a therapist, and you need to check your premises. You need to reconsider your whole philosophy of life. You know, again, it sounds extreme, but we've seen it.
How do people say, well, gee, they talk about horrors of the past, Pol Pot in Cambodia or Adolf Hitler in Germany. They say, well, how could people let this happen? How could people, you just look at the people protesting on behalf of the Palestinians. Just look at them. They are sanctioning murder, evil, slaughter of civilians, attacks on women and children, kidnapping of old people. That's what they're advocating. And you say to yourself, how does that happen? Watch, look around. It's not as though it's something from the past and something we need to search for. It's happening right now on the streets of New York and London. Right now, people are sanctioning true evil, murder, the slaughter of civilians. That's what's going on. Go, walk up to them, talk to them. Look at how they justify themselves. Look how warped they are. Look how warped they are. Yeah, it is ultimately the intellectuals are the most to blame. Yeah, and notice it is the university students who are the ones leading the charge on these sort of evil things, because that's where it's coming from. From, by the way, as I can't help but say again, from tax subsidized universities are promoting this hate-filled, I won't characterize it as it should be, hate-filled stuff. But you ask yourself, how could that be? How could there be people at the time who are justifying the evil? We're seeing it live right before us today, ladies and gentlemen. It's the power of ideas. It's the power of ideas.
It does always come back to philosophy, even more than politics, even more than psychology, even more than history. If you understand Leonard Peikoff's theory of history, that won't sound like a contradiction. Read the ominous parallels. It does always come back to ideas. And for that reason, James, I want to wrap up. I think we've made our point and made it well. A couple more questions we can address that will relate to current events. I want to remind folks the ARCUK is going to be focused on the war. And yes, this is a war. We will be addressing these issues. We will be clarifying matters. We will be giving you the opportunity in the chat there to express yourselves. We appreciate your support. We'll be back in just under half an hour with the Daily Objective. James, I am looking forward to hearing you talk to Razi on the topic of a new Middle East. I have my own ideas about what a one-state solution is going to look like if we are willing to win this war.
Right.
I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. We will be back half an hour after that for the reality show, which I will be participating in, if I can manage to calm myself down. Several topics, all related to the war, including Hamas are not militants. Well, we'll talk about that. The BBC doesn't want to call them terrorists. They want to call them militants. We will get into that as well. Folks, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of the conversation. James, looking forward to hearing you in half an hour. Folks, be as well as you can and do not stop fighting.